If you are in a position where you're required to persevere by an external force, right? A manager, a leader, or if I'm leading someone, there's going to be requirements of a job, right? I'm leading them. Secondarily, look at what can I take from that? It'll enhance my purpose.
Welcome back. We're glad you returned for episode 9 of the ReedFlections podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I'm Art Calderon. I'll be steering us through conversations today with Reed Nyffeler. If this is your first time joining us, Reed is a husband, he's a father. He shares his time, talent, and treasures with communities all over the globe. He's a CEO of a global franchising firm headquartered right here in the heartland of America. Has a lot of personal and professional experiences that he's going to share with us to learn how to live a life on purpose. Episodes 1 through 4, we talked about priorities, God. We talked about family, productivity, and finally, enjoyment and rest. Now we're developing habits to focus on priorities and pursue our purpose. Our last episode was diligent practice, right? Not just doing things once and giving up, but practicing the right things to reach our goal. Today, we're talking about the importance of perseverance to continue towards excellent performance, not giving up. So what was a time when you had to persevere through hard things to achieve a big goal for you?
Yeah, and I think perseverance is a trap, and I would even use perseverance and persistence synonymously, because when we diligently practice, at some point we become bored.
Yes.
Right? There's either two things happen. We get great resistance and or we get bored. And so one, the resistance is so heavy. I mean, let's say running, right? As I went back to a scenario, I was running and I was improving my running. At some point you hit a plateau.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens at any time in any practice, whether that's my communication style, whether that's my abilities or to study in a school environment, or even as an employee, and you hit a plateau. And I see this all the time, we're a franchise organization, and, I see franchisees that come out of the gate and they want to be the world's best, the biggest, take everything on. And then they're practicing early on, they make progress, and then there's a plateau. And at that plateau, that is where the trap is. Because one, they're bored with the practice. They've been doing it for an extended period of time, or the resistance is so hard. Now it's hard. I got to do even more effort. And I feel like I've been doing all this effort for a period of time.
Right.
And so that's where persistence can break down. And so, you will then also, those are things, if you've been doing it for a period of time and you've done diligent practice and you've persisted and you've persevered and that resistance is there, this is where you can use words like burnout or work-life balance or, and many times what you realize that you stop persisting because of an emotional thing, not a physical barrier. It's an emotional barrier. You don't want to anymore. You're
it's
bored.
internal.
It's internal.
Yeah.
It's not physical, right? Have you really reached your ceiling in your business performance? Have you really reached your ceiling in your educational performance? Or is the next step of persistence require that much more for you and you're tired and you don't want to do it, right? I mean, if you're pursuing an advanced degree, it's like, man, I've already been in school for 18 years. I started when I was 4 and here I am. Now I get an advanced degree. And do I really want to? Right? It's not a matter of physically you can do it. You could probably go to class, get your advanced degree, but emotionally you aren't committed to doing it. Right. And so I think the first thing to recognize is persistence and perseverance is an emotional thing to stop. Now I'll speak to the other side. There are some things we need to quit. And I want to give a couple of examples as to where that is. Here, we always go back to our purpose. This is about our purpose, and our purpose is built up by our priorities. And so over time, things change, and we should ultimately quit because it doesn't make sense. And so if you recall, my priorities are faith, family, productivity, and relaxation. So when I first got married, we didn't have any children. And it had been my practice as part of my relaxation to consistently work out. And so I'd work out 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week. And so we continued to work out. And then in my mid-20s, I had my first child and worked out a little bit that I could work out. And then my wife would work out and we'd watch our daughter because we didn't want to get daycare at the time. And so then pretty soon we had our second child. And I was like,
Things
okay,
started changing.
that's
then,
right. And I said, I'm a highly committed person. If you haven't picked up on that now, I'm a highly committed person. So I said, and I evaluate myself each and every year, typically around my birthday in January, and I say, okay, am I persisting to demonstrate my commitment, or am I persisting on account of purpose? And to me, that is when it's saying, if my persistence does not lead me closer to my purpose, I should consider reevaluating my persistence.
Something's got to change.
Something's got to change.
Right.
So I sat there and I said, but I've always worked out. I mean, I have been in athletics since I was a kid. I'm used to practice. I enjoy the endorphins. I enjoy the interaction. I enjoy the exercise, but it conflicts with my purpose because I was committed
Your
to
priorities, right?
That's right. My
Okay.
priorities, faith, family. Now I had productivity, work, and exercise. So I'm saying exercise, my fourth priority. I could not spend time with my kids, right? And my kids, and I look at this long term, and this will be kind of our next episode with Eternal. Long term, I think you say, I'm really glad in your 20s that you worked out every day, Dad, and your physique, you maintained it because you weren't improving it at that point. I was past my athletic prime. And, I really noticed your physique when I was 2.
Yeah.
And,
Even though you weren't around because you were working out all the time.
in the pictures I saw it, or whatever the case might be, right? And we think about that and we realize, wait a minute, are they going to remember, hey,
Right.
I remember when you drove me to school each day and invested your time there. Or I remember having conversations with you around the dinner table instead of when you were working out, and we joked about X, Y, and Z. Those are the things they're going to remember, because then I said, okay, my persistence around going to work out that I'd been doing at that point for 15, 20 years of my life needed to change, because it impacted adversely my priorities. And so I think that's something to look at, is we should persist when there's resistance, but that doesn't mean we should quit just out of emotional reasons. We should do it in a purpose-driven reason. So if we're quitting emotionally, we're doing it because we don't want to do it, right? And so that's consistently going forward. And I'll give the alternative side of that story. And so one of the things very few people may know about me is I've never drank a drop of alcohol my entire life. And there's a lot of reasons behind that all. And I kind of look at my priorities and I said, what does it do to enhance any of those priorities, candidly? It doesn't really enhance my faith. It doesn't enhance my family, and it doesn't enhance my work. And quite frankly, maybe people would do it in a social setting.
It actually detracts maybe from some of those things.
Yes. And many people would say, okay, in a social setting, it may provide more fun. And again, that's my fourth priority. However, on the other side of that, that's something I've always persisted with. And, many times as we look at resistance, we can characterize that as peer pressure, right? Peer pressure is a form of resistance. And I remember a business dealing where that's my third priority. And someone said, I won't do business with you if you don't have a drink with me.
Someone said that to you.
I said,
Wow.
I don't trust anyone. They literally said that to me. They won't drink with me. And I sat there and I said, okay, this is my opportunity to persist or persevere. Because my priority, and I'm making that commitment for the sake of predominantly my faith and family, because here now my work is tested. Saying this person, and I needed this particular business partner at the time, or wanted this business partner at the time. And I said, the only thing I have to do is have one drink. And now at that point, I was in my late 20s and I'd lived my entire life not doing it. Right. And I was committed to that. And so my decision was I going to make a change? And it was just one drink, right? That would change my life, right?
And maybe some wonderful benefits if you did that. If
That's
you made
right.
That small
so
little...
there I am in the midst of that. And he directly said this to me. And I had a choice to make in that moment. I could say, okay, am I going to appeal to this audience? And all this commitment that I've made, to myself through this process, am I going to make that and break that at the time? And so I said, I'm sorry, we're not going to do business together. And he's like, what? And, it wasn't about the drinking. That's the thing I think a lot of people think it was. It was about, can I control your activities? It would not have been a good partner if someone is asking you to do something and they're putting a condition on it. They're trying to control.
Especially that petty, right? Well, I mean, whether you drink or not, that's not really the issue, but it's that petty.
That petty.
Yeah.
Correct. So there's persistence there and perseverance. And at the same time what I realized afterwards, and I thought through more thoroughly, is wait a minute, I was going to defer to them as the leader. Because they're asking me to do something, and if that business partnership were to go forward, they would always feel like they'd have something over me. They would always try to control and manipulate. So that's why we have to go back to our priorities, which is what I did. I wasn't doing it I went back to my priorities. I said, your business relationship to me will not be a priority. Because I've decided before I came in here what my priorities were. I've decided before I came in here what my habits were. And if you're asking me to change on this one, what are you going to ask me to change next?
Right.
And as a result of that, now I've invalidated my credibility because I defer to what you think in the moment with some conditional challenge to make that change. And so that's a time where we stick to our perseverance.
Right.
So in that moment, I stuck to my priorities and purpose. So in that case, I gave you both stories. And so it should always be, your perseverance should always be, calibrated against your priorities.
Yeah.
And ultimately your priorities should align with your purpose. And that's how you live a life on purpose.
Speaking about perseverance, you may not know it to look at me, but I was never a good student. Yes, hard to believe. I struggled, hated school. It was so hard for me from high school, even before high school, all the way. But I actually have a graduate degree, and I remember I was in school with my wife. We were enrolled together, and I had this class. It was a language class, and it was incredibly hard. I took it 3 times.
Mm.
I needed this class to graduate, and I took that thing, and it was so hard. But I knew I needed to persevere. I needed to graduate, and I needed to actually pass this class, and I just barely did. Finally, on that third time, the plans were laid. Graduation was set. Family was flying in from the other side of the country, and man, there was everything was riding on it. But I had to persevere and push through it, and ultimately did it. Cost me more money, but hey, what's money? That's sometimes it's hard to believe that there will be a reward if we persevere, right? Sometimes you're right in the middle of it. All you can see is this is a struggle. What are some things that keep you focused on the end goal when you want to pack it, when you just want to give up? You're just like, how do you focus on the end goal when things are really hard?
Well, Art, you've advanced as a student because you take direction really well here. I mean, I think the first time there's a script that's read, you read it right away and you never have to retake. And then I think the other thing is...
This is a take 7, by the way.
Yeah. I think the other thing is there's some wisdom there. I mean, you married a doctor and they were very studious. And so
Yes.
either you sit next to him and you have good vision and you can kind of see the answers there and
I
get you
got
through it,
some
or
grace.
there's some tutoring. So either way, it helped you. So you've grown from there. But I think ultimately, to the point I was making before, if we look at the temporal, we're not going to persevere. If we look at the pain we're feeling in the moment of study in your Hebrew class or whatever class it was you're taking, and we're saying, I just can't do it, my energy's waning, you're not gonna persevere.
Right.
But if you look at the outcome saying, hey, the result of the learning, the result of the diligence, the result of the perseverance, I'm gonna feel way better as a result of that.
Yeah. Some people will put a picture or a reminder.
That's right.
Somewhere where they could see it every day. Whatever that goal is, they put a reminder up there, right?
And that reminds me of a couple of stories of notable athletes that had that perseverance. And so a goal can also be a trap for perseverance because in the end, the goal is unfulfilling. It should be a lifetime, right? And so I'll give an example, and it goes back to my story on the drinking. That's a lifetime choice. That's not a destination. That's not a goal. That's not an objective, right? It's a lifetime choice. And so I remember watching a video, and it was of Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, right? And so he, for those who do not know his earlier career before he was a head football coach, he was actually a superstar athlete.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a defensive back in the NFL.
The Cowboys, right?
And for the Cowboys, among a couple of other teams. Yeah. And also he was a baseball player. And so he's the most recent athlete that played baseball professionally and football professionally in the same season. Bo Jackson had done it previously. And so there was a season where he was in the World Series. Then he had won the Super Bowl and was the MVP.
Wow.
And so I watched this podcast, this video. It's on YouTube if you want to look it up yourself. And as I'm summarizing and recharacterizing the story, afterwards he says, I had achieved my goal. I had literally everything I'd ever written on my goal board before. I had fought through all the practices, and if you study anything about Deion, he had resistance, and some of that was self-inflicted, right? I mean, he had fans booing him and resistance constantly, and he leaned into that. He's persistent. I mean, from an athlete standpoint, trying to do one sport is exponentially difficult.
Right.
Do 2 sports at a professional level at the same time. You couldn't find anybody else at that time that probably had more challenges in their life. But at the same time, as one could say, he achieved his goal. That persistence paid off, and he was a pinnacle. He won the Super Bowl and was the MVP in that particular season. But then right after that goal, he talks about it. He was on the verge of committing suicide.
I've heard that, yeah.
He's now persisting for purpose. If you look at what he's doing as a coach, he is, of course, coaching for a championship. Nobody would disregard that. But at the same time, he's developing young men and coaching to then see progress in others. And he's migrated from an athlete to a coach. And what has changed in that period of time, not his capability, he's still probably a really good athlete. I mean, I'm sure.
Even without part of his toes.
That's right. He had some, health challenges. But nonetheless, he also is a probably understands the game well because he
Right.
played at the highest level. But now his purpose has changed.
Right.
And so he doesn't get worn out. He's not on, even if his team had some early success this most recent year and then had some late losses, he's not destitute or destroyed. He still persists. He still wakes up each day and adds recruits and focuses on that. And to me, that is saying what changed is not his ability to persevere or persist
Or his work ethic.
or his work
yeah.
ethic. It's his focus on his purpose. And so how do you get through that? You focus on your purpose and it's aligned with your priorities. So then it truly becomes at an early stage in the career, and this is the other story I want to give you, is really about, are you someone that persists? There's some people, and I'll say this, I watch champions, and I've mentioned this before. I've listened to their championship speeches. After they win their game, MVP, doesn't matter. I have yet to hear anyone. They say, how did you become this champion? And they said, I was the first one to quit. I was late to practice. In fact, I was so good, I didn't need to practice. And, I was obviously the first one to quit. And if the coach looked over and said, who's going to quit first? They knew it was me, and so I quit every time and I couldn't persist. And I was just, your basic run of the mill guy. And I was a constant quitter. And if it got tough, I was the first one to quit and tell everybody else to quit too, in fact.
Yeah.
Now, so many people live their life that way and they wonder why they don't have a championship because they are the ones encouraging other people to quit instead of encouraging other people to persist. So there's this father that understood that was super powerful, that perseverance he was a trash pickup guy. And so he was out in Michigan and he was a sanitation worker. And so as he's driving around, he had brought his son with him and his son was in junior high at the time. And he wanted to show his son the value of work and work ethic. And it was freezing cold. And it was the school day had been canceled because it was cold. And so he's out driving his son around. And he goes and picks up one of these trash cans, and there was a bag sitting next to it, a plastic bag with trash in it, sitting next to your metal cans. This was about 30, 40 years ago. And he picks up the trash can, throws it in by hand, and then there's a bag, grabs the bag, and he pulls the bag, and it had frozen in the ground. And so the bag ripped, and there was some trash on the ground. And so he walks around, and he picks up all the trash. And he knew his dad was going to make him do that. This is the son picking this up. And he gets in the car to drive off with his dad. He said, you didn't finish. He said, what do you mean, Dad? I know you were going to tell me to pick up all the trash, and I picked up all the bag, and I picked up all the trash that fell out of the bag. And he said, but you didn't scrape the ground. He said, there is still plastic frozen in the ice, and there's a scraper in the back, and I want you to scrape the ground. He's like, I'm not going to do it. And the dad said, you are on my route, and it is my credibility. And so ultimately, I want to ask you this question, son. Is today the day you quit on yourself? Because you committed to do a job, and you're going to persevere, and you're going to see that through. And so the son saw that, sat in the chair, thought for a second, decided to get out his ice scraper, scraped up the bag, got in the car, still cold, freezing, thinking about it afterwards. But 25 years later, he said, what led you to be one of the most iconic NBA champions in the entire world? And he said, I remember a story where I was out there with my dad as a teenager, and I realized my ability to follow through on my commitments and persevere and persist will be what leads me to be a champion. And his name is Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson was in Detroit with his dad, who was a trash collector, a sanitation worker. And his dad told him that persistence is the only thing I'm going to teach you, son, because that will lead to championships. And he attributes that experience to the success later. So I'm telling you right now, it is not a matter of what you're persisting for. It's, are you a person that perseveres and persists? Because if you're not, it doesn't matter what you apply your activities and actions to. But if you are, you can be a champion, right? Because you're going to choose that personal championship as to what you're going to apply that power of persistence to. And that is exactly what happened to Magic Johnson. His dad didn't know he was going to be an NBA champion and in the 80s and really an iconic basketball player that's ultimately one of the first basketball player billionaires. He applied that in other areas of life. He's a billionaire. People don't realize
He's a businessman.
He's a businessman. In the 80s, they didn't pay you what they pay now.
Right.
He applied that persistence in other genres because he learned how to persist and persevere, regardless of how cold it was, how much he didn't want to do it, or how he was a teenager. And that is the power of persistence and perseverance. And his purpose, his dad's purpose, was to educate his kid on how to have persistence and perseverance instead of being focused on a goal.
Perseverance is something that, to your point, you can apply it to any part of your. It's that you're not just going to be a great basketball star,
That's right.
right? But perseverance in any part and dredging up the sincerity and the drive to be to persevere takes a lot of energy. But I think maybe even harder is when you're in charge of people or when you're influencing people and you teach them or you guide them or you coach them to persevere. Now, talk a little bit about doing that for other people. Have you had an opportunity to do that?
Absolutely. And so I think the hardest part is, first of all, we try to educate and evaluate other people, but we don't demonstrate it. And so they need to see me persevering first in order to believe it, right? And that's part of leadership is you lead from the front and you show through perseverance and process. And so I have some relationship that I've had for, decades, and they remember early stage in my life when I had to persevere to a greater degree. And so
It gives you a lot of credibility all of a sudden.
of
right?
course,
Yeah.
and I think people watch that over a period of time, the perseverance through whatever the obstacle might have been, whether it's a financial obstacle, which, as a business owner, you're going to have a financial obstacle, and how you address that is really the perseverance. And they've seen me work through that, including selling my car and cashing my 401k, and they're saying, "Wow, he's really committed." And as a result of my commitment, what do you think their commitment will be? I was
Right.
like, "Oh, I can't come up with $20. Do you think they're going to put in $20? I can't find another 5 minutes of my time. Do you think they're going to find another 5 minutes of their time? I can't have a tough conversation with a franchisee. Will you have that on my behalf? No, they're not. And so I think the first thing is, as a leader leading someone else, are you demonstrating? Is your credibility established in perseverance? And if it's not, that's where you need to start. You can't coach anyone without perseverance. So I'll tell the story about my college career as a result. And I think many times we don't build endurance. And part of that is we have a period of time, and I really look at college as that time to determine endurance, right? Because up until that point, you're really 18. You're not an adult recognized by most states. And so you really are under the responsibility of your parents. And so they're going to be pushing you. But when you get to college and in my case, I'm here in another city that my parents aren't at. They don't see my hourly or daily or weekly
Right.
activities. So now I can make choices on my own. And maybe for some of you, you didn't go to college, but it's your first work environment where you didn't have a manager. You're working autonomously. You don't have somebody standing right next to you telling you what to do every second or every minute. And that in the end is who you ultimately are. And so what I see in those environments is people that lose their endurance actually. So when they're not being watched, their performance redacts. They pull back, they do less effort, they don't persevere, right? Think of it when the coach is watching and you're at practice. I'm doing the drill like you told me to, coach. Coach is like, I'm going to go get a drink. Oh, coach is coming. Right? I mean, that's what happens in life if we don't have, self-driven perseverance, right? Is we are waiting for the coach to tell us what to do, and as a direct result of that. So we need to demonstrate that. So I think it first starts with conditioning. And so I remember being in college, and I remember my first semester, it was the first month, I sat there and I went and I said, you know what? I'm going to graduate in 3 years. I'm here in college, and I can see this is not a good use of my time. And I had already enrolled my freshman year, first semester for 18 hours. And then I took out, at the time, it was a binder, and I said, okay, how many courses do I need to graduate? 125 credits. And so then I did the math on that. And that means that I needed at least probably 43, 44 credits a year, or 20 plus per semester in order to graduate in 3 years.
20 plus. Wow.
20 plus. And so then I said, okay, I'm going to enroll. And I did 21 credit hours my second semester.
Holy smokes.
And so then I said, okay, I'm going to be a little bit behind, right? Because I need that 40 plus. And that was 39 right there. And so I went and I said, okay, I'm going to enroll in 24. I think I can do it. And so then there was a requirement at the University of Nebraska, I never knew this, that you could not enroll in more than 22 credit hours without the approval of the dean of admissions, I believe, or something like that. And so I go, okay. And so when I tried to apply, they said, nope, you already have the maximum 21 credit hours. And so I went to the dean of admissions, and this is perseverance. I was committed to my goal. I was going to see it all the way through because that's who I was. And so then I went and they said, nobody's ever asked me to take more than credit hours at 21. What are you, crazy? They're taking 3 years or 4 years and making it 5 right now, right? Why are you trying to shorten this? And I said, well, then approve me. He's like, okay. So he approved me. But what I realized was I was then, because I took 24 credit hours and I took it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I wish I was joking, but I wasn't. I had a 7 a.m. class and I wasn't until 9:30 at night. Oof. And so then I would work on Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays to afford all these credit hours. And I had 3 or 4 jobs I was holding down at the time. What did that do? That perseverance, because I had to be intentional about my studies. I had to be intentional about my time. I had to be intentional about my work responsibility. I had to be intentional about these other things. Of course, I didn't have a family at the time, but that built up endurance. And so it was that exercise in college when I thought I set a goal right after I graduated high school. My mom said, "You're an idiot," actually. Literally, that was her term. Why would you ever graduate in 3 years? Why don't you go longer? So I had
And
resistance
pay more
immediately
money.
and pay more money. And I had resistance right there. But that perseverance showed me that if I set my mind to something by just sheer effort and work, I'm building perseverance and endurance. And so I firmly and fundamentally believe, just like the Magic Johnson story, that my commitment at that stage in my life demonstrated my ability to succeed in the business that I'm in now. Because I knew that if I could graduate and the dean of admissions had to approve me, and this is a guy, I'm 18, and I'm asking this 50-year-old guy that oversees 25,000 students to let this one kid take an additional course that was above that. So I recognized that there's no limiting factor other than your commitment. Because here I am, I could say, I'm too young, I can't ask. I don't have the resources, I don't have the time, I don't have the discipline. I wasn't all that smart at the time. I mean, I passed all my classes. I didn't want to retake them. I knew that would set me back further. But at the same time my goal was to get through that. And so it demonstrated to me, immaterial in my education, perseverance and the power of it. And that is self-driven and not driven by the coach watching me. And so if I demonstrate that, then now it's coaching, back to your question, coaching others. And so what do I try to do there? I ask them, back to other questions: who are you? Why are you here for? What is this year? What is the purpose? What is your fundamental underlying purpose? And so some people as employees will say, well, I really want to get to this title. I want to get to this level of compensation. I want to own a business, right? They are only going to persevere towards that goal. They're not going to persevere for my affirmation. Because I told you as their manager is not going to do it. So as a manager, the first thing I do to coach someone else for perseverance is saying, what is something you'd wake up for? Right? And so and we'll get to subsequent podcasts where it's eternal, transcendent, universal. So one of the things that has been in my life my entire time is my faith. So no one has to say, go study on your own for the sake of your faith, right? That's something that's part of my purpose and fundamentally what I have to do. And so then once I see what their purpose, that they're going to do forever, what their aspirations are, right? So let's put this in a career sense. Some people are saying, I just love marketing. I love it. I love seeing the new creative ideas and everything else. Okay, great. So then they will lose interest if they're doing it for the sake of the audience, right? So we'll use an artist, an early artist. They would say that Picasso, who was a revolutionary artist, right? He took abstract painting and kind of innovated with the way he used oil painting and otherwise, and that's why he's just the most notable artist. He was never doing it for the audience. But he would say to you, if you study what he was commenting in, he didn't do it for the audience. He did it to challenge his ability to do art. And so if you truly see someone that is persisting through toiling with that art, that did it without affirmation, they were doing it for improvement. The first thing he wanted to do was tear up his painting. Some of the most notable paintings he had were mistakes in his mind because he didn't do it to the mind that he wanted to do. He almost wanted to throw it away. But he wasn't doing it for affirmation. He was doing it to challenge himself, persist for improvement, and challenge the way that he was looking at abstract things and creating it in a form of art that he could appreciate and use the tools at the time, canvas and oil paints, to improve that. And so when I talk to them, I'd say, okay, don't, as an employee, do this for my sake. Don't do it for the title. Don't do it for the pay.
This is how you help others persevere.
That's right. I say, do it for your sake and your career long term. Because before I started this entity that I'm working at now, there was 10 years of organizations that a manager had a goal for me, that a leader told me to do something.
Yeah.
But I never looked at it as I'm doing this for you. I always looked at it and said, what skill do I need in order to apply to future use according to my purpose? So with regard to marketing, I learned the power of branding. One of the early jobs I had when I drove 70,000 miles was I worked for DeWalt. It was there I realized I could go sell tools. That wasn't going to be the rest of my life, right? But I realized branding has power. Literally what happened was they had Black & Decker professional tool and they threw a yellow label on it. Same tool. They only changed the plastic casing. All the internal ingredients were the same. Your drill bits, your drill drivers, your battery, all the stuff changed. It was only branding. So what I was taking from that was I'm persevering through this request of my manager to go sell tools. But what am I doing? I'm choosing to learn something I'll keep forever, which is branding. And I've used that countless times. Also routing and other things. So if you are in a position where you're required to persevere by an external force, right? A manager, a leader, or if I'm leading someone, there's going to be requirements of a job, right? I'm leading them. Secondarily, look at what can I take from that? It'll enhance my purpose, right? So I remember talking to my 18-year-old son, and he went to work at this location, and he's like, I can't do it anymore. I want to quit, right? And I said, it was a small franchise organization. He said, the manager's no good, the boss is no good, and I don't like the hours. I said, okay, you made a commitment, and you're not going to quit without seeing it out the 2 weeks. He said, I don't know if I can do it. I said, what can you learn in that environment? And so he looked back and he said, well, I can learn how to potentially operate a business, by looking at the other way. This is poor management. I can look at good management.
Right.
I can look at these
Learn
types
what
of things.
not to do.
And it was those experiences when he changed his mindset in that environment that said, what can I take from this instead of what is it taking from me? That really, he's like, now it was a different thing. He actually ended up staying longer, right? As a result of that, because his perception changed. So when we're in that coaching environment, and maybe we're on the other side of that, we're saying, how can I change my perception as an employee to then persevere? Or if we're a coach or a manager, or I'm leading someone, I'm saying, how can I change their perception that will lead them to persevere? Because the perseverance is an action, but it's driven by your purpose. And so if you can get their perception to orient to their purpose instead of the activity you're asking them to do, you'll be able to help them achieve that.
So to recap, you want them to not focus on the task or what you're telling them to do, but find somehow a bigger purpose for whatever it is they're working on, and that will teach them to persevere and learn a skill that's more valuable than just the task you have.
That's
them
right.
do. That's it. Okay, good. Well, thanks again, Reed. Thanks for reminding us about ways to develop habits, and today sharing more about the importance of persevering through challenges along the way to achieving our goals and accomplishing our purpose. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on the ReedFlections podcast on life, leadership, and learning. Next time, we will talk about what it means to live with eternity in mind. Deep. I'm gonna be here for that one. Until then, I'm Art Calderon. Be purposeful.
And to take my last word, some of you are always trying to find a goal, and that's all you're working on. And I think you're focused on the wrong thing. Focused on your ability to persevere, because no matter what goal you pick anywhere, if you do not persevere, you're not going to achieve it. The goal is not the problem. Your ability to persevere is. So just like we learned in the story of Michael or Magic Johnson, he learned the power of perseverance. The goal of being an NBA superstar came later. Today, decide that you will persist and persevere, that is something in your character. And then no matter whatever goal you choose, you will see that to fruition because of your perseverance and persistence, regardless of the resistance. I will see you as we talk about eternity next podcast.
All right.